Hello and welcome to episode 22 of the Ascendancy podcast. My name is Chris,
I'm Austin.
and in today's video, we're going to be exploring the root cause of animal exploitation. As activists and as vegans, it's very important for us in our activism to try to target what is the root of the issue when it comes to bringing about a vegan world. And there's some very common ideas throughout the vegan community regarding what this is. Some will say it's speciesism. Some will say it's human supremacy, just this mindset that humans are better than everyone else. And we're going to challenge these ideas a bit today and present some new ideas. And we're exploring the topic. So, of course, if you have any other thoughts or you disagree with what we're saying, we're really excited to see, what kind of conversation we can start. So leave a comment below, and I'll leave it off to you, Austin, to get us into this one.
Yeah, absolutely. Our perspective is that the root cause of animal exploitation, this global human domination of animals, is actually the predatory mentality, sometimes described as might makes right. And this is the underlying thought process that differentiates people between those who exploit and prey on others, whether animals or human, and those who don't. And that's that on some level it's acceptable to violate and prey on others in general. And one thing that's important to understand about this is that it's not necessarily that the people who have this perspective think it's morally acceptable in like an intellectual or academic way, but more so that it's acceptable in any way, because they could potentially be rejecting the concept of morality itself, or potentially know they're doing wrong on some logical basis. But despite this, despite moral pressures, despite any sort of systems of ethics, they choose to violate and prey on those who are weaker or more vulnerable relative to themselves. And the reason why this could be the true core of exploitation of non-veganism is that there are multiple different rationales that non-vegans have for preying on animals. Now, speciesism, or preying on animals with the belief that humans are a superior species to other animals, is certainly one of them. It's one of the more common ones that we hear, but there are other excuses and rationale that they have, such as preying on animals based on intellect or their capability, their power relative to humans. Maybe you've heard people say, well, animals can't do anything to stop me, or, well, an animal has never been to the moon or created great poetry or great literature or something of this nature. So species isn't the only rationale or excuse that non-vegans have. Another example or perspective is that, let's say hypothetically, right now, we ended all forms of discrimination on the planet. So we end racism, speciesism, classism, ageism, everything is completely gone. And we look at this state of the world. Have we ended all crime, all slavery, all predation? The answer is, if we look at current modern day statistics, is no. Because when you look at people right now and you look at these crime statistics, who is the most likely to murder another person? Statistically speaking, the person who's the most similar to themselves. If you are a white man in America, the person who's most likely to murder you is another white man of your same age group. If you look at, for example, crime when it comes to Black Americans, the people who are most likely to murder them are other Black Americans. So we can take racism out of the equation, but we're still left with the crime. We can take speciesism out of the equation, but as we've seen from the other rationale that non-vegans use, they could potentially still prey on animals. So removing discrimination from people's minds doesn't necessarily solve the problem. I look back to myself when I went vegan. I wouldn't have described myself pre-vegan as a speciesist. I didn't even have any real thoughts on the subject. I considered myself as someone who liked animals, and through this naivety at the time would have considered myself as someone who respected animals. I didn't harbor hatred or resentment or superiority to animals. I was actually living in complete ignorance, 100% ignorance on this topic. I didn't think about what animal exploitation looked like or what it meant. And when I saw this reality of it, and I heard the words of Gary Yurovsky as well, I realized that this was an injustice. And it wasn't because they were animals, but because I realized that all predation on others is wrong, regardless of any characteristic. And Chris, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, those are some interesting thoughts, and thanks for getting us into this topic. And you raised a few points that really clicked with me. And I remember many months back we were kind of conversing about this topic, and it was actually you who influenced me to change the way I thought about this because, like myself, like many vegans, we tend to believe if we can just destroy speciesism, if we can just destroy human supremacy, we will arrive at a vegan world. And you kind of got my brain turning about this and asking, will we actually? Because if you look at, human context, like you suggested, looking at statistics, when there's, human exploitation is rather human discrimination is very socially unacceptable now. And we see less racism, less sexism, etc., compared to past generations for sure, no matter what certain media outlets will try to spin. Like there's a lot less discrimination nowadays. Society's more equitable, but you still see human predation on other humans. You still see humans exploiting other humans, and it's not often because of certain traits they have, say their race or their sex. It just comes down to, I'm going to prey on you, I'm going to exploit you because I can, because I'm more powerful than you. Maybe I have intimidatory force because I have weapons, or I have, a big gang behind me, and we're gonna, traffic children, or we're gonna traffic women. It's just this concept that we can do what we want just because we have the power to. It doesn't always come down to the fact that there's some logical rationale behind that exploitation. It's just this predation, this predatory mindset, like you suggest, and it kind of boils down to this might makes right philosophy. So if you're not familiar, might makes right is essentially anything that I want to do to someone less powerful than me is justified because I can do it, and who's going to stop me from doing it? And we often see this argument posed by some non-vegans when we're advocating for veganism. They just say that, well, I like eating animals because they taste good, or they're weaker than me, or they're more stupid than me, and who are you to tell me to stop? It's that is them, directly telling us to our face how they truly feel. Now, like, some of them may just be trolling, they may not be genuine in the arguments they present to us, but some of them are serious, and we should believe them when they say, I just prey on animals, I just eat XYZ, animal flesh, because I like the way it tastes, and you're not going to stop me. I think those people are telling the truth to us. It's not the case that there's some deeper bias or discrimination that they have that we just have to uncover. And once we can show them the wrong of their ways, they will become vegan. I don't think it's as clear cut as that. When people say they like preying on animals just because they can, that's the truth. That's the truth of their philosophical outlook on life. Might makes right, and it's not always the case that there's speciesism or a human supremacy, involved there for guiding their behavior. It's just the fact that they have this predatory mindset. So when we look at, the subsets of the non-vegan population, like you said, Austin, and which applies to myself as well. Before we were vegan, we were just completely ignorant to the topic of animal exploitation. We didn't necessarily have any hatred for other animals based on the fact that they weren't humans. We were just born into the society, born into a culture where it's just socially normal, and you just don't think twice at all about the food you're putting on your plate, the clothes you're putting on your body, the products you're buying that involve animal testing. It's just this mindless behavior that you're just used to doing, right? So there's a subset of the population that's just completely ignorant about it, and it's not that they're non-vegan because they're speciesist. They're just non-vegan because it's the way things are and the way they're used to, and they've never had their behaviors questioned on a deep level. So we have that subset, which applies to many people, and those are the people we really like to reach when it comes to our activism, because with just a few questions, with just a bit of accountability and education, we can get these people to become vegan rather easily and also to become activists. Then there's the next subset of people that are just genuinely evil and sadistic. Like, there's not a lot of argumentation that we can pose to get them to change their ways. They just prey on animals because they like to and because they have the power to. And, there's not much we can do. We can try to, shame them. We could try to argue against them logically and hope it breaks through. But there is that subset of people that are just downright evil. They're just downright, cruel and heartless, and they will not extend basic decency to other animals. They just prey on them because they like to. And then there's also a subset of humans that are speciesist, that are human supremacists, who do hold those views that, well, animals aren't humans, they're just pigs, they're just cows. We can discriminate against them because, they look different from us. They aren't humans like us. We're better than them. We're not denying that these people exist. It's just a subset of the non-vegans that are out there. It doesn't explain all of them. So this is what we're trying to bring to light in this episode. It's not always the case that, speciesism or human supremacy is the root of all animal exploitation. When we go back 10,000 years ago at the start of the agricultural revolution, was it this logical rationale of humans being better than animals that led us to start exploiting them, to start domesticating them, to start herding and farming them? I don't think that's the case. I think humans just reached a point where we had the means, the technology advancements, we had bigger communities, we had the means to now exploit and subjugate animals for our benefit, and we just did it because, well, it just made our lives better, of course ignoring the interests of the animal. And I think that a large component of that still runs to today. It's just this theme that predation of others is susceptible. So that's my perspective on it, and I hope we're bringing some new light to the subject, because even myself, like I said, I always thought speciesism is the root of all evil, of all discrimination, because I heard Gary Yourofsky say it in his speech, and I think there's some truth to it, but it doesn't necessarily capture the whole picture, because there's still evil in this world that can't just be explained from a speciesist rationale or some type of human supremacist rationale.
That was extraordinarily well said. I couldn't agree more with what you said. And one thing I want people viewing this to do is to put yourself back in the mindset that you had before you were vegan. When you were a pre-vegan, were you preying on animals because you viewed yourself as a superior species to them? When you were consuming animals or wearing them or paying for them to be exploited, were you thinking, I'm the superior being, so therefore I am ordained by God or evolution or some kind of physiological advantage to prey on these beings who are inferior to me? Or were you essentially just a cog in a machine? From my perspective, when I think back to myself, I was essentially that, just a cog in a machine. And my behavior wasn't rooted in a speciesism or a feeling of superiority, but just pure ignorance. And when we look at like the modern landscape of injustice, there are many instances of people preying on others and also using these differences or characteristics as an excuse to prey on them of say protected classes or something like this. But let's say we look at human slavery right now, such as within factories in say China, there's a Foxconn factory. These are people enslaving people who are the same race, same nationality, potentially the same sex as themselves. When we eliminate, say, racism or sexism, this still exists. If we eliminate speciesism, these people preying on other species will possibly still exist, because at the end of the day, the animals are more vulnerable than them. They're not protected by legal frameworks. They still have the capacity to do it, even if they're not a quote unquote speciesist. And there are an infinite number of ways that people can discriminate against others, whether it be species or race or sex or perceived class, anything of this nature. But that leaves us with a problem. If we are going to stop injustice, we would then have to attack every one of these specific forms of discrimination as if going after this hydra. Why go after this and combat every potential ism or protected class when we can get to the core of the issue, and that's that it's wrong to prey on others regardless of any difference. It's just wrong to prey on, to exploit others. I think once we come to that understanding, we can have more clarity as far as why people harm others. And I think from what I've seen, these types of discrimination are more so a rationalization for people's behavior rather than the core of it. People on some level are selfish. They want to do things that comfort them, that make them feel good, and they'll do so to the detriment of others. And they can do that for many different reasons, but in the process of doing this, unthinkingly often, I think they're put in a place where they have to come up with some kind of an on-the-spot rationalization, and that's one of them that we hear, including when it comes to species. But one of the ramifications of that is this turns, thought into a crime. I don't care if a person thinks on some level they're superior to other species, as long as they still are cognizant that they shouldn't prey on them. That's really, the crux of the issue, that it's okay to prey on and exploit others. If you want to think you're superior or be proud of who you are, even relative to others, I don't care. As long as you don't prey on me, leave me alone. Think what you want, but leave me alone. Think what you want, but leave animals alone, is my perspective on that. And I think this concept of anti-speciesism and just this anti-discriminatory stance in general has this underlying assumption that humans are intrinsically good. That if we address all of these ideologies, like say speciesism, and we check them all off, one by one, the end result is that humans will be good moral agents, that they'll be good to each other and be good to animals. But I don't see any historical examples of that. And when I see like the modern climate of people preying on people like themselves, this doesn't seem to be the reality. You can, remove speciesism and racism and all of these things, and we're still left with people preying on each other. We're still left with child predators, with people who prey on animals, with people who enslave others or force them to work in horrific conditions. So I don't see injustice ending just by getting rid of discrimination. Now, is there, a valid reason or place to do so? Sure, but I don't view that as removing this inherent immorality that seems to be quite prevalent throughout the human race. One thing that I've thought about is that when we look at these people who make their whole personality anti-discrimination, and we see it, it's a typical leftist, non-vegan, or anti-vegan. There are so many people who I've personally encountered, especially online, that's where these people seem to live, who make their personality anti-discrimination, and yet these are some of the most steadfast animal exploiters on the planet. There are people who wrap their entire identity around anti discrimination and still manage to be predatory. When I see this, I can't possibly think that anti discrimination alone will get these people, or potentially anyone, to understand at the core foundational level that it is wrong to prey on others for any reason.
Yeah, those are some really, really solid points there. And I want to go back to what you said regarding when we confront non-vegans about their exploitation of animals, they often present these, probably poorly thought out logical arguments where they'll say, oh, well, the animals, they can't speak English or they're not smart enough. And we think that these are just these kind of ad hoc rationalizations. Like they just think of them after the fact and they just say whatever they want to say at that moment. But it's just a veil covering the actual reason why they behave the way they do. They just like preying on animals because it gives them pleasure, it gives them comfort, it gives them convenience. A lot of people aren't honest. They're not being upfront and telling you the truth of why they behave the way they do. So we hear these, speciesist arguments. We hear these appeals to, anthropocentrism, that humans are better, humans are the cream of the crop, we're the best. But oftentimes with these people, they're just saying that in the moment. They underneath that, they believe that they just like preying on animals because, like I said, it gives them pleasure or convenience or comfort, and they don't have the honesty to just tell us that directly to our face. And what you say there is critical regarding when it comes to eliminating these different isms. It's like you could spend eternity going after every different form of discrimination, but will that truly lead us to the world that we're looking for? Like, yes, it's good to combat these isms, but is it really the whole picture? Because there is still going to be predation and exploitation, not based on specific traits, but just based on this predatory drive that some people have that compels them to prey on others who are weaker or more vulnerable than them. That's what has to be focused on and targeted. And I think you raise a good point. Like, I don't think human nature is like intrinsically good. I think humans just kind of go with the crowd. They kind of go with whatever everyone else is doing. So at this point, we don't want it to just be, doom and gloom. We want to have actually present some takeaways for activists, for vegans who are listening. And I think the main takeaway message we want to have in this episode is that it's not necessarily speciesism or human supremacy that explains the non-vegan world, that explains the non-vegan lifestyle, the exploitation of animals. We've presented our arguments and our thoughts herein, and it's important to understand that there is a very real predatory drive that exists in many humans, and that they just exploit other animals because they can, like I said, because it gives them pleasure, convenience, comfort, etc. And it's important to keep this in mind because not everyone you deal with is a good actor. They're just not. It's not the case that you strip away every ism and then you have a good human in front of you who will behave perfectly morally. Like, there are these people who just enjoy preying on others, whether that be other humans, other animals. We often see that interchangeably. If someone is happy to prey on animals, if they torture animals as children, they're very likely to commit heinous acts against other humans when they're older, and it kind of goes the other way too. If someone's happy to prey on other humans and they enjoy doing it, they're very likely going to be happy to prey on animals. So it's important to keep this in mind when it comes to your activism. Okay, not everything is going to boil down to this logical system of speciesism or human supremacy. There is this predatory drive that must be addressed. So I'll lend it to you, Austin. What are your takeaways for any vegans or activists who are watching here?
Yeah, from a pragmatic perspective, when outreaching people, I wouldn't bring up speciesism or a speciesist mentality unless it's specifically used as an excuse to prey on animals. Like, what I do regularly is define veganism first, because so often people don't even understand what veganism is, which is the ethical principle that humans shouldn't exploit animals. Now, once you present them with the ethical reality of veganism, they may have multiple different routes they want to go. It could be based on species. It could be, what we understand as a straw man, something to do with physiology or health or protein or something like this. And they could try to create some kind of a differentiation between humans and animals to prey on them. And it might not necessarily be species. It could, of course, be intellect. That's a very common one. And then you can show how intellect is an arbitrary characteristic for preying on others. By, for example, you're left with two choices. It's either okay to prey on, exploit, consume humans up to infancy, or they're both immoral. And I think if someone is honest, actually an honest person and logically consistent, they're then going to admit that it's wrong to prey on both for their own rationale and sort of throw that excuse out of the window. So I wouldn't even really open the conversation up to speciesism unless they say it. Now, if they do use that as an excuse, and of course, go forward and address how or a species-based excuse is irrational, it's not logically consistent, and it does have parallels to racism, sexism. Another important takeaway from this, created by this perspective that people aren't intrinsically good once you strip away the discrimination, is that some people aren't as reachable as others, and our time as activists is very valuable. So if you're talking to someone and they're just completely writing it off, they always have a new excuse, they come back with something new, it's good to have the perspective that, hey, some people are just shitty. So put your time, effort, energy into reaching people who are, more willing to change. Like imagine yourself, before you went vegan, try to find more people like that. So activism at this point really is a numbers game. Like the more people we potentially outreach with high quality activism where we define veganism and show people the truth of animal agriculture, the better. So it's good to not get hung up, just really trying to sway one individual's perspective. The more the better when it comes to activism, because a lot of people just aren't ready for the message yet, even when you address their excuses. And I think that the ultimate reason why, of course, is that predatory mentality, that predatory disposition. Another thing that I've seen in regards to what I said earlier is that human nature isn't intrinsically benevolent. When we outreach people and they, let's say, threaten us or they outright mock animal exploitation or animal suffering, these people aren't really even behaving in accordance to some kind of a moral code or a moral framework, not even based on like religion or something like this. There is a large segment of non-vegans who are sadists, who are sadists, and they genuinely enjoy exploiting animals, and they will do their actions like regardless of the morality of it. And think about, like, for example, if MS-13, a lot of these people in this gang from El Salvador, they relish the fact that they're predatory. They have a mentality like, see you in hell, like they know based on their own ethical system that they're like the bad guy. And I think a lot of people, a lot of non-vegans, of course, especially, have this perspective where when they prey on animals, they feel big, bad, powerful. They feel like, in their mind, they're like a demon, and this is something that empowers them. So I think this is a very uncomfortable truth about human nature, is that you do have a lot of genuinely bad people who by their own rationale are bad. And I think once the majority of vegans understand that and accept that, we can do activism more effectively by really trying to focus on people who aren't like sadistic or evil at their core.
Yeah, I think those are some really good takeaways. And like you said, it's an inconvenient truth about human nature that I think a lot of people need to digest and internalize. We need to save our time for those who are reachable, who are not evil and sadists and malevolent. There are a lot of those people out there who are just misinformed, ignorant completely about the horrible consequences of their non-vegan lifestyles. Those are the people we have to target in our activism, and there are millions, maybe even billions of them out there that are still, waiting to be woken up. So once we get a lot of those people, we can kind of reach a critical mass down the line where there's enough social pressure and and the social power to make that change, to make the laws change. But between now and then, there's a lot of work to do. So we need to keep that in mind. Human nature is not intrinsically good. There are these bad actors that you don't want to be banging your head up against the wall, trying to outreach them all day, and they do exist, and we have to spend our time wisely. So that brings us pretty much to the end of this episode.
Thank you for watching.
Yeah, definitely leave a comment below if you disagree. We're exploring this topic. We're open to other dialogue, other disagreements. So we'd be happy to hear from you. And Chris signing out. Peace.
Thank you. Peace out.